Can Joe Biden win again in 2024? He made a play for blue-collar votes in Michigan this week when he joined auto workers on strike, becoming the first sitting president to ever walk a union picket line. A day later, Donald Trump skipped the second Republican debate for a rally at a non-union auto parts supplier outside Detroit. The trips came just days after Team Biden put out their first ad of the campaign to attack Trump by name.
He says he stands with auto workers, but as president, Donald Trump passed tax breaks for his rich friends while automakers shuttered their plants and Michigan lost manufacturing jobs.
Is that message going to resonate with voters on the fence? These days, most national polls show Biden and Trump running neck and neck in head-to-head matchups. And that's if both of them make it through the primaries, which at this point isn't yet a foregone conclusion. Joining me now to discuss are Boston Globe columnist Scot Lehigh and Jesse Rhodes, a professor of political science and a co-director of the UMass Poll. Scot, Jesse, thanks for being here to run through it with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Jesse, I'm curious if you can help kind of break this down, because it's so rare for a sitting president to face a primary challenge. Why is this something that pundits and those of us here on your friendly neighborhood politics show are even talking about?
So you're right. It is fairly rare since the emergence of the modern primaries for sitting presidents to face a primary challenge. It has happened. So in 1980, Edward Kennedy gave Jimmy Carter a real run for the nomination, despite the fact that Carter was president. And in 1992, Pat Robertson challenged George H.W. Bush for the Republican nomination, though Bush was the sitting president. Neither of them won, but it did signal that both presidential candidates, despite the fact that they were incumbents, were weak. And notably, both Carter and Bush lost the general election campaigns. So why are we seeing this now? I think there are a couple of reasons. First, in 2016, it's important to remember that although support ultimately consolidated around Biden, it's not as if there was overwhelming enthusiasm among Democrats for Biden at the time. Rather, I think that there was a lot of pragmatic recognition among Democrats that Biden was best positioned to defeat Trump.
This is in the 2020 election?
Pardon me, in 2020. And that was viewed as essentially an existential election for Democrats. And so that's an important piece of background information, that Biden has not engendered the same kind of very strong enthusiasm, for example, that Biden did, or that Obama did. And then secondly, there is the issue of Biden's advanced age. So he's currently 80 years old. He would be 86 at the end of a second term. And so I think that Democrats, especially younger Democrats, progressive Democrats, have certain misgivings about a second term. But that said, where we stand now, Biden is clearly the front runner, and we haven't seen a serious primary challenger emerge. So I think it's premature to think that Biden's renomination is threatened.
Okay. And Scot, you wrote a column recently suggesting that what Biden needs to do here is what you said is come out of his cocoon. Can you walk through what you mean by that?
Sure. Yeah, I think, Biden, one of the liabilities, he has aged visibly in the job. He used to sort of do that mock jog that people do up to the podium. Now he walks very arthritically. I think this has given people the idea that he is old, but that he is very old. And the Republicans drive this message continually that he has lapsed into his dotage. I don't think if you believe that, you then have to believe that someone who is essentially senile beat Donald Trump in 2 debates in the fall of 2020 and also outmaneuvered the Republicans in that impromptu skirmishing we saw in the State of the Union. So I think that's a narrative that a lot of people have bought into in some way, because Biden does make gaffes. He always has. He's a stutterer. He doesn't speak particularly well, and he stops and glitches up and moves around his speech disabilities a little bit. But I feel like you watch him, when you see him impromptu, he's quite sharp. I think his mind is good. His body is not so good. But I think he needs to show people that. And one of the things I've said he needs to do is come out and do some real press conferences. He tends to be very, very cloistered, very cocoon, and doesn't interact in a way that people can watch his mind or see his mind work, rather than watch his somewhat infirm body shuffle around. And I think he needs to do that and engage. I fear one of the reasons he doesn't want to do that is because he doesn't want to take on the Hunter stuff, which is, it's this roiling thing that Republicans are trying to tinder up or gin up into a real scandal. So they had a problem yesterday when their chief witnesses said, so far, guys, you don't really have anything here. But Biden does not deal with those questions well. He's snappish and defensive, but I think he's going to have to. And I think he needs to get out there and interact in a way where people can make a judgment about him and say, okay, look, he's old, he's arthritic, but his mind is working well, and he has a real good command of the issues. Now, we've also seen Trump going out and saying Biden's going to get us into World War II and talking about, World War II is some time ago, and talking about how he beat Obama and making a lot of glitches that would make you say this is probably not someone who should be talking about his opponent as having slipped into his senescence. So I think Biden can do this, but I think they do need to engage his campaign a little bit differently.
So we have Biden is 80, Trump not too far behind him at 77. Yeah. Jesse, how big a role do you think age is likely to play in the minds of voters here as we approach 2024?
Well, I think that age is a pretty significant concern for voters, both when we're talking about Biden and when we're talking about Trump. So if you look at recent polls, majorities of Americans view the age as a pretty significant concern for both candidates. More so for Biden, I think, very much due to the reasons that we've been discussing, both that Biden as president, people are seeing him, he has noticeably aged as president, and then also because of the conservative media that has really highlighted his age as a concern. But our own polling with the University of Massachusetts Amherst poll has shown that voters are very concerned about Trump's age as well. And in fact, majorities of voters would, if they had their preference, see both Biden and Trump walk away.
Interesting.
When Rockefeller ran in 1964, the reason he just divorced Happy, or his previous wife had taken up with Happy, it was a big scandal in the country in those days. The reason he got into the race in 64 is because he thought by the time 68 rolled around, he would be older than 60, and it would be too old to run for president. Remember, we worried about Ronald Reagan was running at 69 back in 1980, and people worried about Bob Dole, who was running, I think it was 71 in 1996, and now we've got octogenarians or near octogenarians running. It is a concern. Finally, this campaign, I believe, is going to come down to winning ugly and the Biden people saying, okay, you may not like me, you may not like a president this old, but it is me or the opposition, and that is your choice. Like Kevin White used to say, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the opposition. And if that opposition is Trump, I continue to think Biden wins. I do think that a younger, more moderate, MAGA light Republican could beat Biden, but so far, Nikki Haley is probably the only one, and Chris Christie, I believe, could if he could get the nomination, but that's tough. Although I do think Chris Christie is a New Hampshire type. I think he's the kind of no-nonsense, brash sort of candidate that New Hampshire likes, and I think that once Ron DeSantis sort of sinks all the way down, he's clearly on his way out, and the field is clear a little bit for a second place, for someone to emerge there. I think that Christie does have a shot in New Hampshire, as does Nikki Haley. But I think we're making a big mistake in the media and in the polling world by saying, look, this thing is basically over on the Republican side. It's going to be Trump. Trump has a littered field of obstacles, a minefield ahead of him. In his own past is a munitions dump waiting to blow up on him. So I don't think that I think we're going to see a much closer enjoined Republican campaign than this state would have, than this part of the campaign would have you think.
So we do have, the Biden campaign has started mentioning Trump by name. We've seen the point about the auto workers that the President Biden was on the picket line this week. Jesse, do you think kind of making this distinction of, one candidate saying they're standing with labor, another candidate making a point of maybe standing up against organized labor, is this something that voters are likely to be having their eye on?
So I think that this is a pretty smart move by President Biden. He's making clear that he's standing with auto workers and standing with unions, and this is really important for him. Perhaps not so much for the public signaling, but for his signaling to both private sector unions and public sector unions going into the heart of the 2024 campaign. So it's really important to remember that in this country that unions are not merely organizations of people. They are really strong political organizations with lots of resources that, especially when they band together, can make a big difference in terms of contributing to campaigns, both in terms of monetary resources, but also the mobilization of people. And in the 2024 presidential election, the campaign is going to come down to states in which union workers are a significant constituency and can make the difference, especially in terms of voter turnout and voter mobilization efforts. And so I think what we're seeing here is Biden making a real effort to consolidate his support among these organizations as a way to increase the odds that they will work as hard as they can for him going into 2024 in the critical states like Michigan, states like Wisconsin, states like North Carolina, that will likely be the difference between a Biden victory and a Biden defeat. So I think it was a really, really smart move. Former President Trump, obviously he's trying to do some signaling. He's primarily looking at support among non-unionized facilities. Clearly, the union leaders are not fooled by this. They've been very vocal in their criticism of him. It's not clear whether that will resonate with ordinary Americans. Perhaps he's doing some signaling to very, very attentive Republicans and very attentive conservative activist groups that may be able to make the distinction between unionized and non-union plants. But I actually don't think that that was a particularly smart move for him. He's not going to be appealing to the workers who are organized and who matter, and less attentive audiences are just not going to be able to make the distinction.
Okay.
And can I say, Katie, I think one of the big mistakes Trump made here messaging is he went out there and railed against electric cars. And to do that, EVs, and to do that, you essentially have to dig into his denialist posture on global warming. Global warming makes no difference to him, and he's made that clear. He believes it's a hoax, or sometimes when he says, well, maybe it isn't a hoax, he doesn't care about it. That is a hugely important issue, particularly to young people. And he left himself open to a left uppercut there in a way that to my mind, is mind-numbingly stupid. Meanwhile, because this is an issue, and this drives voters, particularly voters under 40, who are going to suffer a lot of the consequences. And his whole position, this electric car stuff is nonsense, and whales are blah, 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 all the nonsense he spews on warming, that is going to be an issue that will be exploited in the general campaign. And this will be an issue that drives a lot of people to the polls. Meanwhile, Biden has managed to take, Biden and the governor out there, managed to take Michigan from what was really a swing state and make it a light blue state, a state that is tentatively in the Democratic column. And that's a big achievement. And part of that, obviously, is the auto stuff.
I think we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you both. Scott, you got something you want to mention real quick?
I do. This is my new novel, just out, Just East of Nowhere, set on way up on the coast of Maine in Eastport, where I went to high school back in the deep recesses of the last century. Been on the bestseller list in Portland, fiction bestseller list for most of August, and I just hope people might check it out.
All right, thanks. So a different kind of reading there that folks can do. Jesse, Scott, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you again for having me.